Welcome back to Desperate Living, Cultural Chaos and Forgotten Stories. Today I'm taking a look at a couple of new CDs that arrived in the post, courtesy of Rockbeat Records. Halloween has arrived early, although it's arguably Halloween every day around these parts anyway. But for those of you looking for some vintage horror audio excitement and some classic old school rock and roll, these might well be of interest. Let's first have a look at what might be the more immediately interesting of the two discs, Famous Monsters Speak. This is a reissue of a 1963 LP that first appeared through Wonderland Records and Golden Records, both of whom specialised in children's recordings, which might give you a clue as to who this was being pitched at. The album is, of course, an offshoot of Famous Monsters of Filmland, the legendary magazine that first appeared as a one-shot in 1958 and then became very popular and very influential all the way until it ended its original run in 1983. I'll be honest, I've never really liked Famous Monsters as a magazine. Its juvenile approach and willful nostalgia never appealed to me when I was a kid, and I always felt that it had a malicious influence on what were called monster magazines throughout the 1960s and 1970s. While many of its rivals, like Marvel's Monsters of the Movies and the Monster Times in the 1970s, were much better magazines, I think the idea that horror movies were a childish interest was pervasive, certainly throughout US publications, well into the mid-70s, even as horror movies became ever more brutal and extreme. Still, let's open this up and take a look. As you can probably see when I flip the cover over here, this one hasn't quite survived the trip from the US to the UK intact. One of the less discussed downsides to CDs is the fragility of the jewel case, which is terrible design in retrospect. Luckily, I still have a few old jewel cases lying around from the days when they came with CDRs. And so let's just take one of those, remove the cover and flip everything over. Going back to Famous Monsters, I can certainly look at those magazines now and see value in them as an introduction to the genre for young people, and certainly Forrest Jackman was an important figure, one who deserves better than the efforts to cancel him in recent years might suggest. But as a magazine, I don't believe that Famous Monsters has any real value. I mean, certainly it was part of that whole horror movie revival of the 1960s, the era of the quote-unquote monster kid, and I can't tell you how much I hate that phrase, especially when it's applied to or by middle-aged people trying to relive their childhood. But that's another argument for another day. Feel free to make an impassioned defense of the monster kid concept in the comments if you are one of those people and if you think it's a really great phrase that sums up exactly what horror fans are. Monster magazines, Aurora model kits, countless other toys, games, cash-ins emerged in the mid-60s into the 1970s, and Famous Monsters Speak was certainly part of this new horror boom. So I've never actually heard this before. I'm aware that it has been available online, but I've never listened to it, so this will be a voyage of discovery for me as well as you. So let's check it out.
Who comes to the crypt of Count Dracula? Who disturbs the sleep of the vampire? Ah, it's you. You have come to see if there is such a thing as Dracula. Many men have come. None have ever returned. Come closer. 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 Look. Look into the coffin. Such things cannot exist. But I am here, and you have eyes to see me. No, I will not harm you. Why? I have a purpose.
So there's a couple of extracts from the two stories on the album. Thrilling stuff, I'm sure you'll agree. Famous Monsters Speaks was sold in the back pages of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Pages that were full of exciting and fascinating stuff for kids to buy. It did seem to slip into obscurity fairly quickly. I don't recall it still being sold in the 1970s editions I've seen. But it remains a fondly remembered tie-in. Writer Chernyberg also intriguingly adapted King Kong for a 1974 LP, which obviously I'm in the market for, and wrote several other children's audio adventures. The narrator, Gabriel Dell, was an American actor who was one of the original Dead End Kids in a series of 1930s movies and had a pretty solid acting career up until the end of the 1970s. He's also rumoured to have been the voice of Boba Fett in the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special. And Hal Johnson was an arranger and audio effects technician who'd worked with Martin Denny, providing a lot of the exotic sound effects that pepper Denny's albums. Let's turn now to Return of Halloween Nuggets, not The Return, just Return, a follow-up to 2022's Halloween Nuggets, the third in the series. There's a long and storied history of rock and roll horror, one that we might come back to at some point. Lots of bands, some real, some session men gathered together for a single project. Recorded novelty horror ditties, inspired by Bobby Pickett's Monster Mash and the monster movie craze of the era. It spanned musical genres from garage to doo-wop, surf to lounge, and I suspect that most of the records were expected to be entirely ephemeral. But there's so much great stuff in the monster music world, and this release, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. As with the previous album, it has a very basic sleeve, just a single sheet. But again, most of the music on here, not all of it, but most of it is unfamiliar to me, so let me have a listen and I'll report back. Okay, now I've listened to the CD and can report in. Not that this is a surprise, but these are all fantastic tracks on the whole. Kicks off with the Standells Gorilla, which you heard at the beginning of this video, and a song that's appeared on many a compilation. Other highlights include the nasty little Night Stalker from Teddy Durant, recorded in 1965 but sounding like it could have come out a decade later. Other tracks that perhaps push the Halloween theme a little bit. The Devotion's Devil's Gotten Into My Baby is not a supernatural tune, but this girl group's Soul Groove is so good, but I'm not going to complain about its inclusion here. The joy of collections like this is that they always have a few tracks that you're unfamiliar with. So many indie and novelty records came and went in the 1960s that no matter how much of a fan you might be, you'll never know all of them. So the more collections like this, the better. Any downsides? Well, the packages are a little bit on the basic side. I've probably been spoiled by cherry red box sets and the like, but a booklet with background info and the band bios would be welcome here. But I'm probably being picky. If these were the vinyl editions, I'd have no complaints about the packaging. And these are both available on vinyl, so I would suggest checking out those versions if you can. If nothing else, it adds a little bit more authenticity and value to collections of tracks that you can otherwise download quite easily. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this quick look at a couple of CD oddities. If you want more of this sort of thing, just let us know in the comments. If you haven't already done so, make sure that you subscribe, like the video, like our previous videos, support us in whatever way you can. Everything helps to develop the channel and keep us producing more of this sort of wild nonsense. We'll see you again very soon.